For all of us involved in international development work, bilaterals, multilaterals, the NGOs, we're all concerned about building national and local sustainability in support of those activities that we're there to do. None of us want to be there doing what we do long term, for lots of reasons, the least of which oftentimes is simply lack of resources. We can't do everything everywhere for everyone all the time. We have to be very selective, and so we have to be able to do what we can and then build that capacity, work with governments to build that capacity, step back and then move on to the next challenge. Governments and local NGO takeover of all these types of development programs that we've talked about is always going to be a key priority for us. So school feeding programs, MCHC, that's maternal child health care, that would be incentives that would be provided to mothers to bring their children to health clinics, food for work activities, general relief operations, and anything that at the times of emergencies is trying to wean the population very quickly off from simply free food rations to a more constructive, reconstructive rehabilitation type of mode early on in the post-relief phase of the emergency. And then in many cases, not all, but in many cases where countries that are slightly better developed, slightly more capacity that's developed over the years, we even can help to begin with governments to build local safety net program capacity. And there are a number of countries around the world where that has gone well, where we can provide cash, vouchers, and various programs, for example, in food aid related needs, where we don't have to provide the food, ship it in and such. The food is available in the markets, but people may not have the purchasing power. And there can be similar programs to what you have in the US with food stamp programs that many countries have now developed now with the help of the international community. So overall, priority for us is to build local implementation capacity, and that's local by meaning at the community level, the state, provincial level, national level, and that also the governments develop a policy capacity, that is a capacity to understand on their own terms the needs of the hungry poor, of the most disenfranchised in their society. Oftentimes, quite frankly, in many countries, I, as head of an agency working in a country with a particular mandate, I may well have a better understanding, myself and my staff, of the need and the reasons and the issues for the hungry, that the hungry poor exist in that country. Much more so than the central government, much more so than some of the people who may have actually come from that background many generations ago, but don't like to be reminded, feeling that they are moving on. This is often the case with major gaps of the haves and the have-nots that we have in all countries, but in many third world countries can be quite stark, quite real. And one of the functions that we then have, as I've mentioned in earlier lectures, is vulnerability assessment mapping. That is working with governments so that they better understand who the most vulnerable are, and then most importantly, what the tools and policies could be to support that population. A few examples would be Bangladesh, China, India. In the case of disaster relief, for example, many times both the bilateral and the multilateral side have very little to teach governments about immediate relief programs. For example, in Bangladesh, given that the country floods on a regular basis, it's a large river delta, the military over the years has become very experienced with immediate humanitarian needs, and being able to mount on a very rapid response basis overwhelming support for the communities that are affected by flooding. We don't have to do that for them. What often we will do is we as donors, we will support with resources and technical assistance when that burden becomes overwhelming. There are some floods from year to year that become so large that they're not able to assist both with their own personnel, although usually what it is simply they have got the sufficient personnel, but not enough resources, not enough food. And so we will ship in food aid to support the country to feed its people, but they'll manage it all themselves. China is another example with the recent earthquakes, where the foreign rescue teams came in to assist, food aid came in to assist, But in the end of the day, it was the responsibility of the government to rise to the occasion. It's the same in India and again, many developing countries around the world who have that capacity to handle their problems themselves, exactly as it should be. And we will simply be there, the international community, not to do it for them, only when we're asked and only in extreme cases, but generally it's the resources that have to be provided to help them, to channel the resources through their existing channels so they can manage it all themselves. There are always a few exceptions to that, and those are the large-scale, massive disasters in the world that we all know from the front pages, the earthquake in Haiti, the Japanese tsunami, the major Asian tsunami at Christmas of 2004. Major disasters like that, even in those situations, some of the most developed countries can be completely overwhelmed, both in terms of personnel response, resources, and the help is needed. And of course, it can happen in first world countries too. Witness the tragedy of Katrina when it hit New Orleans. Governments can be organized to respond, but having outside help is often most welcome. On the development program side, a few more examples again of Brazil, China, and Vietnam. In the case of the UN World Food Program, SFP, school feeding programs, we phased out of 21 countries around the world today, where we have worked with governments to develop school feeding programs, and then we had an exit strategy in that original design where we've stepped back, and those governments have taken over those programs completely on their own. I helped develop and design the program in Namibia, for example. It was a 5-year agreement with the government. We would come in for 5 years, and we had a phase-out plan for each year built in up front, so the government knew exactly what we were intending to do and when we would no longer be there. And there is no higher praise, no higher indication of a sustainable idea that you have developed with the government together when, as you as an international agency phase out, they make up the difference with their own scarce government resources in a third world country. When that happens, then you know that you've been in the right place and that they will truly take over and be able to sustain that same program. And in school feeding programs in particular, this has worked well around the world. Brazil now has a school feeding program throughout the country that WFP helped the government design and implement back in the 1960s. Health is another area, community outreach, China, Vietnam, these are all countries that have very successful, still improvement always, but can be expected, but very, very expanded, well organized health clinics. Rural access to health is an area that many of these countries have been extremely successful in being able to manage with the help of the international community again. Infrastructure works is another area, rural roads, irrigation, fish ponds, schools. This is all an area, especially on the infrastructure side, where large agencies, this is where the World Bank often comes in to help with building the infrastructure, but only under understanding that it's going to be maintained and managed once that infrastructure has been built, and we on the donor side have then pulled out. And there are many of those who, concern themselves at times, as we all should. They're asking questions, as you would, in terms of who's who and what we're all doing in the world, and is this really making a difference? Well, keep in mind that during the 60s, the 10 largest aid recipients from U.S. foreign aid in the 60s are today the 10 largest trading partners of the U.S. Trading on a commercial basis. Economies developed. The programs worked. At the end of the day, not purely because of the foreign aid support, but those same countries with that assistance were able to develop their economies and become major trading partners of the U.S. today. These programs do work.